Hello, welcome to some more Perils in Paradise card reveals. Up today is Mage and Paladin. Both of their entire sets were released, so we get an idea of the identity of what these classes are going to be taking forwards for the rest of the expansion. So first and foremost, let's go with Mage. Mage, we'd already seen one of the cards. We'd seen King Tide, a 4-mana 4/4 legendary minion with Battlecry. Both play spells cost 5 until the end of your next turn. This made me think there was going to be some sort of big spell mage deck going, and indeed, spoilers, there is some support for a big spell mage deck. Now, it's also important to bear in mind with these, evaluations of the cards. This might be the expansion with the best deck building we've ever had in Hearthstone, in terms of the variety of cards you can put into your deck. Because with the new tourist mechanic, where if you have your tourist in the deck, you can put cards from this set into another opponent's class deck. So for example, if you have the Mage Tourist card, you can put Paladin cards into your deck from the Perils of Paradise set. Now, we haven't seen the Druid Tourist yet, but they will have a Tourist that lets you put Mage cards into their class. So we have to be aware of these cards being good in not only Mage, but also in Druid. And similarly, when we get to Paladin, not only do we have to check if they're good in Paladin, but are they good in Mage? It's all going to get confusing. Don't worry, I'll try and help you deal with it. Anyway, what's the other legendary? Let's see what the other legendary is first and foremost. It's Rayla, or Rayla, Sand Sculptor, 4-mana 2/5, the Paladin Tourist minion. After you cast a spell, summon a random 2-cost minion and give it Divine Shield. That's pretty good value, honestly, all bundled together. Like 7 stat line, normally it's like a 3-mana, so you're paying the 1-mana surplus to get the effect. Basically, if you cast a single cheap spell, like a 1-mana spell on it, you're probably breaking, at the very least, even. You're going to get the random 2-drop and Divine Shield. That's kind of like a mana on top of it. Unfortunately, because it's, Mage. Mage doesn't have many 0-cost spells. That's more of a rogue type thing, so you're probably going to be paying 1-cost spell on top of this. So you're probably playing this around turn 5. But there are a lot of ways for to kind of like pseudo-cheat out a spell and get multiple uses of the Rayla. What if you play Rayla and then play Primordial Glyph? That gives you a spell that is discounted by 2. If you find a spell that is 2 or less, you can play the other spell and you can chain the Rayla to give you 2-cost minions with Divine Shield. And that gets pretty spooky. That's a pretty nice tempo turn. Similar to Jaina's Gift. You could just grab a Frostbolt or something, it can generate you another spell, which can trigger Layla. Cryopreservation, Excavate cards often are spells, not all of them admittedly, but a lot of them are, and that could generate you even more spells. And then similarly, Rewind could pull you back these Primordial Glyphs to recast them again, the Jainas. You get the picture now. You could quite easily chain a lot of cheap spells together. Similarly with something like Dark Moon Magician as well, maybe you play your Rayla with your Dark Moon Magician, you start throwing off the 1-cost spells, and it will start casting additional random spells, and you're getting minions with it. I think that's a bit of a pipe dream with the Dark Moon Magician as well, but I actually can see this tempo cheap spell Rayla deck becoming a thing. Again, some spoilers for the future. This is a card that we're going to deal with in a moment for Paladin. Mage can put Paladin spells into their deck if you put this card into your deck. And Paladin has cheap spells too, for example the Life-Saving Aura. It gives you one of these sunscreens which we've mentioned before, which is another 1-cost spell. And you could quite easily put this Life-Saving Aura on an earlier turn. You get 3 sunscreens, you hold them all together, and you just start buffing your minions, you play the cards, and that's maybe 3 procs for your Rayla. Now the sunscreens do cost 1, so you're going to need in total 7 mana for this combo. But that's a pretty big tempo swing if you get 3 minions and 3 6s of stats on top of the 2/5, and they all have Divine Shield. You're going to generate a board that is really, really, really spicy. Next, Marooned Archmage, another card that can help you cast off all of these cheap spells. By the way, this card I think is actually unbelievably strong, even in just its own vacuum. 3-mana 3/3, your first spell each turn costs 2 less. That's incredible. If you cast a spell, this is effectively a 1-mana 3/3. That's incredible! Truly, truly incredible. Obviously, that's not quite the way the game works. You have to wait till 3 before you can do it. But Mage has some decent 2-cost spells that you can, whip out on 3. And Infinitize the Magnitude, you just play Marooned on 3, you get Infinitize, you discover a spell, it gets discounted by 1 as well. You might be able to play it on that turn as well if it's a 1-cost. And then you get the Infinitize back at the end of it all. That's a pretty nice turn 3. Similarly, if you draw into Heatwave or something, you're into a tempo matchup, you can just throw a Heatwave out there with your 3/3 body, and that's really nice against these token decks that are doing pretty nicely right now in the meta. Also, you don't obviously have to wait for the... only have to use 2 mana spells. You could discount a more expensive spell. Obviously, you're going to be doing this on like a turn 5, for example. But imagine your turn 5, you play a 3 mana 3/3, and you draw 4 cards. That's really good, with the volume up, of course, with the finale. So, yeah, I can see Marooned Archmage seeing some play in various decks. Now, again, spoilers for the future. You can probably put the Paladin cards into your deck as long as you put the Mage Tourist into the deck. And you could discount some more expensive spells, like, for example, Power Spike, the new Paladin card that we'll deal with later, that does 4 damage and gives a minion 4/4. So, in total, if you played your Maroon Archmage, let's say this is turn 7, you played the 4 mana Power Spike, you do 4 to the face or something, and this is a 7/7. So you've sort of played 7 mana, 7/7, deal 4 damage. Is that great? No, I actually think Power Spike is a pretty bad card, but you're seeing the dream right now. You also have to be aware, as I've mentioned before, we haven't seen the Druid Tourist yet, but Druid could put Mage cards into your deck. And currently there is a combo deck out there for Druid with Alonius that might want a minion that makes your spells cheaper. Now, admittedly, you have to play 3 up front, so it's not really helping you perform the combo, unless you can discount the Mage minion. But one thing you could potentially do, and again, I'm not sure this will be a thing, if you get the spell damage location out for Druid in advance, then potentially you could push the button, push this on 3, and Woodland Wonders would be a 0 mana spell. So you could, in total, on turn 3, play... Quick maths. 7/13 of stats, 2 of the minions have Taunt. That's actually unbelievably frightening. Like, that's a pretty big tempo turn for a deck that is kind of just trying to survive until it can get its combo off. I think it's a bit of a niche edge case, but just bear in mind again, Druid can use some of these cards. And Druid will use some of these cards, unless the Tourist is really bad. Anyway, we have the second Drinkies, I think, being revealed. It's the Seabreeze Chalice, even. 1 mana Frost spell, deal 2 damage randomly, split amongst all enemies. 3 drinks left. So as a reminder, you drink this, it goes to 2 drinks left, then 1 drink left, then, nothing left. So it's kind of like a repeatable spell 3 times. On paper, this isn't very good. Arcane Missiles, which didn't see any play, it's not in the standard right now. It saw tiny bits of play here and there, but that was 3 damage randomly split amongst all enemies. This is only 2 for the same mana cost. But if you comboed it all together, it's 3 mana to deal 6 damage. That's better than what you'd get from a Cinderstorm. Did Cinderstorm see any play? Not really, no. So I think that is kind of like the ballpark level of the power rating of the card. So you're really playing this more for the ability to cast spells, and that is the benefit you're getting from this. You're casting multiple spells. So again, Rayleigh is obviously one of the big uses of this card. You play your Rayleigh, you maybe chug it 3 times, you're doing 6 damage to your opponent's minions, and then also generating a board of, like, effectively 3 2-mana minions with Divine Shield. That's pretty nice, honestly. Similarly, if you're using something like the Galactic Projection Orb as a finisher, this is 3 separate spells for that card to, machine gun up multiple abilities. And then similarly, we've mentioned this before, maybe you want to put this into your Alonius deck. Currently, the finisher for Alonius is normally Swipe. But maybe, there's a room to put a mage spell instead. Maybe the Seabreeze Chalice could replace it. Personally, I don't think it will be, because Swipe is targeted. Seabreeze Chalice is not targeted. But again, just bear in mind these spell damage Druid decks might try to machine gun you down instead of swipe you down. Alright, another mage spell. Go with the flow. 1 mana. Choose a minion. If it's an enemy, freeze it. If it's friendly, give it spell damage +1. I'm not gonna lie. I might be stupid. Don't answer that. This card looks really bad to me. Like, awfully bad. And I just don't understand the case for it right now. So, I've just brought on here Kobold Geomancer as a cheap minion with spell damage. You'd probably say a 2/2 in modern Hearthstone is about a 1 mana card. So giving spell damage at the very, very best of this, you'd say is a 1 mana effect. So you're basically getting a very standard effect, which in standard nowadays isn't really good enough. My gut feeling is this is intended to go into the Druid Tourist version of the deck and give Alonius more spell damage to do a better combo. I really just don't see a case for this in Mage. Mage has better ways of freezing cards, and also if you're freezing something, you kind of want an extra bit of moolah on the top of it. A bit like something like Cold Storage, which obviously is rotated out now and was for Shaman, where you froze a minion and kind of like effectively drew a card. I just think this is pretty bad, to be honest with you. Tide Pools. This is the new location for Mage, and it's one of these locations that is reopenable. 3 mana, 3 durability. Discover a spell that costs 3 or less. After you cast a spell, reopen it. So obviously the name of the game here is, again, to cast lots of cheap spells, which open your Tide Pool discovers you more cards, and maybe even the cards you discover from Tide Pool can be used to open the Tide Pool again. And basically it's just a value engine, right? To use to, fuel your other cards that like you casting spells. So that's kind of the name of the gimmick. Cast lots of spells, you get a good reward for it. We have seen this in the past. So Magic Trick had basically this effect. This was a 1-use Tide Pool. Tide Pool has 3 uses obviously bundled into it. Slow though, if you're not reopening it, like it's once every other turn for a location. Magic Trick did see play, but I will say the reason Magic Trick saw play in that machine gunny tempo Mage deck was because of stuff like Mana Cyclone and because of Mana Giant. I don't think the cards in this set are quite good enough for you to run this multiple casting spells machine gunny deck, so I'm not quite seeing the full picture. I do believe there might be a tempo Mage deck out there, but this one where you get tons of, or you're really hard focused on casting multiple different spells, I just don't see the end product on it. Obviously Marooned Archmage could help you achieve this goal. You play your Tide Pools on 1 turn, next turn you play your Marooned Archmage, you get a free spell potentially after you cast the location. Assuming you get, a 2 or less spell, that's going to cost 0 with Marooned Archmage. You play it, the Tide Pool reopens, you get another spell. So there is some world where this could be a thing, but random discovery value decks typically aren't very good, and I think that it's going to be the same with the Mage deck. Again, the big payoff for this is probably something like Galactic Projection Orb. There could also be some other cards. Again, I kind of alluded to this, and I think this might be a deck, Tempo Mage, where you run stuff like Vicious Slither Spear or Mantle Shapers, and you try and machine gun off a few like cheap spells, and then maybe you just tempo out these minions with like pretty high attack for you casting spells, or pretty good stats for the cost if you've cast multiple spells, and maybe you just aggro your opponent down. I don't know if that's going to be good enough, but we'll see. Part of the reason why I'm not sure this will be good enough is currently in Standard, if you wanted to do something like this where you just want to generate like tons of value for casting lots of spells, you could do it with Pyrotechnician. It is 1 mana more, but you do get a 2/5 body with it. And instead of getting spells that cost 3 or less, you just get random fire spells. Fire spells are pretty good right now, so that isn't a thing, and therefore I don't think this will be a good thing at the very least. But I'd like to try it out, and hopefully I am incorrect. It's also worth noting, again, this could go into Druid, and we have been, teased this Druid location set. But Druid actually could really abuse a spell that is 3 or less, because a lot of Druid spells that are 3 or less fall into 2 categories. Mana Cheat, like Innovate, Funnel Cake, Rehydrate. Rehydrate is just a self-fulfilling prophecy as well with Tide Pools. You play your Tide Pools, assuming you have, the mana to cast the Rehydrate in the begin with. You heal for 7, you quick draw, you get the 2 mana crystals back, and it reopens Tide Pool for you to push it again. So you could chain these all together if you had 5 mana and heal for 21. Probably not the greatest use of Tide Pools, plus hoping to get Rehydrate 3 times. I'm sure it'll happen in some games and really, make people angry. But yeah, there's a lot of Mana Cheat. There's also a lot of cheap spells that deal damage to the face, like the Swipe, the Sparkling File. There's also, I can't remember what it's called there, but one of the nature ones that either does 3 or 2 damage. So this could conceivably be in this Alonius deck to try and generate you either Mana Cheat to make the combo more easy to pull off, or find you additional damage to go to the face. At the very least, if you generate tons and tons of spells, you could get something like Contaminated Lasher working as well. I still don't think it's necessarily worth the cost, but if you found a way, I don't know how consistent it is to find, Innovate, Funnel Cake, Rehydrate, which kind of self-fulfill the prophecy of opening the Tide Pools for nothing, so to speak, depending on the board state and your mana state. If it was a thing that you could generate tons of spells quickly and cast them, Contaminated Lecture is good enough to run. It's basically -1 mana 3/3 once you've cast 5 spells. It's just the casting of the 5 spells that is hard. As I said though, if it's consistently able to achieve that by 3, this could be some sort of filthy mana cheating druid deck. Just watch out for it. A card that I'm really interested in, Rising Waves, 3 mana mage spell. Deal 2 damage to all minions. If none die, deal 2 more. I checked Twitter when this card was released or revealed, and people were poo-pooing this card. They were just saying, this is a bad spell, why would you run this when we have Heatwave? Heatwave's garbage! Like, why would you want to run Heatwave? Like, people are running Heatwave right now because Mage hasn't got a good card to deal with the early token deck. They just don't have it. This isn't even great for the tokens, but it can cover both the bases of the token remover and the big thing remover. It is so flexible, and because it's flexible, I love it. Also, you can play around it as an opponent. Love it. Great design. Love it, love it, love it. As a reminder as well, Mage in the past has run stuff like Fire Sale to deal with these aggro decks to, you know, keep them back in their place, put them back in the box. That was 3 to all minions. Rising Waves for 1 mana less is 2 to all minions, but potentially could be way, way, way more. Again, just as a, a note, it does hit all minions. It's both sides of the boards. But Mage, they don't run that many minions, right? Smile. Things this is good at dealing with. What about the hand buff Death Knight decks? You get these giant boards of like the Nerubian Swarm Guards with, like 7/13 stat lines or something along those lines. You just play your Rising Waves, and they slowly succumb to drowning. Really nice. Currently, Flood Paladin's a thing. They often do Showdown into one of the auras to give it extra stat line. This Rising Wave could just deal with that giant board they generate. And as long as you keep dealing with minions with Paladin, you'll win eventually. Also, hand buff Paladin can sometimes generate a ton of minions. Again, Rising Waves, very good at dealing with both boards of cheap minions or boards of big minions. Obviously getting the more value on the big minions and the cheap minions. Similarly, Warlock, hand buff, even deck right now, they often generate these 2 giants. They get a cheap 8 mana giant out there, or an 8/8 giant. They use Forge of Wills on it, and then they have 16/16 of stats. Hey, wouldn't it be nice to Rising Waves that? That's what I thought as well. So yeah, his Heatwave is like, it's competitor right now. I mean, you can also run both in the same deck, I suppose, but I just think Rising Waves just simply outclasses this card, especially when Heatwave is really only like exceptionally good when you quick draw it. Otherwise, it's pretty stinky. And as I kind of alluded to, Druid could put this card into their deck with the Druid Taurus. We've not seen it yet. Druid, like, are losing their shit. Druid players just going crazy. They just don't have stuff to answer board states, which is kind of like, the Druid thing. Rising Waves, if you're playing this slow, more methodical, control-y value Druid deck, you're putting Rising Waves in your deck, almost certainly, as some sort of answer to a big board. Because whenever Druid loses the board, they basically lose the game. They just can't make the tempo swing back round to themselves. So I definitely think this could at least see play in Druid. Alright, now we get to the next package. So I think most of these cards were at least, maybe with the exception of the previous one, for this tempo, cast lots of spells mage deck. Now we're going to see the big spell mage package. Under the Sea, 6 mana. Draw a different spell, summon a random unit of that spell's cost. Now, obviously, you want a very, very expansive spell. If you draw a 1 mana spell, that is terrible. If you draw a 2 mana spell, that is pretty terrible. 3 mana spell, pretty terrible. You get the gist. I think the break-even point is actually about a 6 mana spell. If you're getting a 6 mana spell, you're drawing a card, and by the way, it has to be different from Under the Sea, so it'd have to be, something else at 6 mana. If you draw a card and get a random 6-drop, I think that is not the end of the world. It's still not great. So you're looking for, like, beyond that threshold, which basically is why I'm saying this is it's going to have to go into a big spell mage deck, because you will not want to run anything cheaper than 6, because if you draw it with Under the Sea, you're just going to cry. Obviously, Mage has some big spells in the deck right now, the standard list, right now. Galactic Projection Orb is one of them, Sunset Volley is another one. It'd be very nice to do 6 mana, draw a card, get a random 10-drop, or get a random 9-drop. Both pretty good effects. I will say there's a slight unfortunate thing with the Galactic Projection Orb. It's often gone into minionless mage decks, but there's not enough let me put it this way. You can't really put Under the Sea in Minionless Mage because you wouldn't have any cards to keep you alive until turn 6. That's his issue. So you're going to have to run it in a minion-based deck. You can do that with the Galactic Projection Orb, but I think the most value it ever sees is from Minionless Mage. That being said, Minionless Mage also doesn't run the Galactic Projection Orb often anymore. So we're really looking for some, better big spell mages spells, right? Can you give me some good big spell mage spells? We can. Tsunami, 8 mana frost spell. Summon 3/6 water elementals that freeze. They attack random enemies. So the water elemental, this is a classic minion of Hearthstone. 4 mana 3/6 that when it attacks anything, it freezes it. This Tsunami is kind of like bonkers when you really think about it. You get 3 water elementals. That's 12 mana of minions for 8. And not only that, but they attack randomly, which is kind of like giving them rush/charge, which is kind of like, I would say, a 1 mana effect. It's really, really efficient. And again, this could go face, so you could in theory get 3 water elementals of smashing the face for 9 damage on top of the Tsunami. I think this card is really, really good. And quite importantly, as we're going to deal with in a moment, it's not something that is a targeted spell. So like, if you cast this, through another card where you can't target it, the random nature of the spell isn't that random. You always get the 3 elementals who will attack random elementals. It's not like if it said deal damage, you might hit your own board. It's not one of those big spells. It has to be a benefit to you. Obviously, Under the Sea, very good with this. If you play Under the Sea, you draw a Tsunami. Firstly, kind of appropriate. Secondly, you get 1 card draw and an 8 drop. Very, very nice. King Tide is also not too bad with it. Now, I will posit this, saying that I don't think King Tide is a particularly good card. But imagine a situation, you're on turn 9, or you've got 9 mana crystals, you play King Tide, your Tsunami becomes a 5, because you play Tsunami on top of it, you have a 4/4, 3/3/6s that then attack opponent minions, and the face, freezing galore. And then your opponent has to deal with that board state with their spells costing 5. Now, you might counter-argue me here, and you would be right, saying that most board clears cost more than 5 mana, so you're kind of helping your opponent deal with the board. And I think that's the issue with King Tide, basically. So I don't think King Tide would see any play in this deck, but, it's potentially there if you want to try it. I do think as well this would work with Flame Revenant if you wanted to try and put this into some sort of elemental deck. As they are summoned, they would become 4/7s instead that freeze. It's a 3 extra damage, not insignificant, and it's a 10 mana combo. I don't think this will actually see any play. But again, Druid will love this card. I've just mentioned it's really hard for Druids to take the board state back again. Tsunami is really nice for this. It attacks random enemies, it'll freeze them, it'll hold them up, it'll jam them up, allow you to play your big minions to trade into them in the future. Yeah, and sometimes you will just clear out these like little cheap minions that are left on the board. I think it's really, really solid as a spell. But certainly, the big spell package would love something like this. And we still have more support. Surflopod, 5 mana 5/6 beast, Battlecry. The next spell you draw is cast when drawn. I kind of alluded to this. On these cast when drawn effects, you don't want it to just say deal damage, because that could hit you in the face. It could hit one of your minions. There's an element of randomness about this cast when drawn. So you want effects that don't target the side of the board, basically. And this is actually pretty nice for most of the big spells now. Galactic Projection Orb, Sunset Volley, Yogg in the Box, which obviously you would have to run this in deck with minions if you're running Surflopod. It's still a nice big spell though. Tsunami, Under the Sea, and Elemental Inspiration, which again, I'm not sure you'll put this into the big spell package, but it is a big spell. All good with Surflopod. Fireland's Portal is the one exception. You probably wouldn't put this in your big spell mage deck with Surflopod, because it might hit the Surflopod, for example, and that would be a kind of sad. You played 5 mana to get a random 6 drop. Yay! It's just not quite good enough for standard, so I think you would leave that out. Somewhat spoils their head as well. Paladin does also have a big spell, but we'll come back to that later on. I still don't think Big Spell Mage is going to work. It does have support in the form of DJ Mana Storm. If you can get all these big spells into your hand, potentially you could play the DJ Mana Storm, make them all really cheap, and just start volleying them off. I think of the spells here, though, that would see any play, you'd probably try to run Sunset Volley, Tsunami, Under the Sea, and then maybe Yogg in the Box. I'm not sure about any of the other ones. You could also run something like Kalagos as well to make one of these big spells cheap. and, you know, throw it off. Also maybe discover another big spell as well. I just don't think it's going to work, though, is the unfortunate thing. I think Sunset Volley is really good for this big spell mage deck. I think Tsunami's pretty solid for this big spell mage deck. I think it needs one more really good big spell, and I just don't think Yogg in the Box Under the Sea quite cover it. And also the ability to cast them off multiple times. He doesn't really have that right now either, so sadly, I don't think Big Spell Mage is going to be a thing. Now, just as a reminder again, Druid could put this into the deck, and classically Druid has had some pretty good big spells. Oddly, right now, though, they don't, so this is a watch this space of the future if Druid gets some big spells. Maybe you might put this into your Druid deck instead. The three biggest spells in Druid right now are Drum Circle, Cultivation, and Crystal Cluster. Cultivation you can discount anyway via Treants. Drum Circle you normally want to try and get both the choose one effects. So, again, you don't want to do cast when drawn. So really the only good result is Crystal Cluster. But I don't think it's worth like bastardizing your deck to make sure that Cephalopods will draw Crystal Cluster, which is actually a pretty good outcome. You get either 3 mana crystals or 3 7s. I just don't see it, so. Alright, that is the Mage set done. We're now going to Paladin land. We've already seen Volley More, which implied we we're going to have some sort of cheap spell synergy with the sunscreens. And we saw Sunsapper Linessa, the rogue tourist. Which also, again, implied you're going to get a lot of cheap spells in Paladin, because the spells that cost 2 or less cast twice. Now, Paladin, their tourist is rogue, as you can see from Linessa. Problem with me doing the evaluations right now, Rogue has only had 1 card released so far, or revealed. It's Petty Thief. Or Petty Theft even, sorry. And I don't think Petty Theft will really go into any of the decks. I know it's a lot of value with Linessa, but spoilers ahead for the other cards, I don't see it right now. So, pinch of salt on some of these cards. Depending on what the Rogue cards are, some of the cards might get better, some of them might get worse. Obviously, as well, Mage can use the Paladin spells, but we've kind of dealt with that. But I'll hark back to some of them as we get to them. Anyway, what is the other legendary for Paladin? It is Sank Azel. Sank Azel? I believe that's how you're going to pronounce it. 5 mana 3/8 elemental rush. After this attacks, turn it into a location. The location is, again, Sank Azel. It is an 8 durability location. Give a friendly minion 3 attack and rush. Turn it back into a minion. Okay, this is a confusing card, but I think it is both brilliant and disgustingly overpowered. I've been stewing on this card all day. It's like, is this good? And I've come to the conclusion it is really, really good. Whoops-a-daisy. Spoilers of what I've been doing. This is how I record these things. It's not, you know, particularly clever, but it serves its purpose. Anyway, how Sanctazel works. When you summon him and attack him, he turns into the location. After he's into the location and you push the location, he goes back into a minion, and he can attack again. When he then attacks again and turns back into the location will be closed, so you can't use it again. It's not repetitive, you can't just attack all the way through. Whenever he takes damage, the durability on the location also goes down with an equivalence. Now, here's one of the key things. So this was all released with the Discord. It's also been confirmed since then. The +3 attack you get on the location changes depending on the attack of Sank Azel. And this is actually a really important feature, that his stats are what become the location stats. AKA, if you buff this card, you buff the location as well, like significantly. So if you put, you know, the sunscreen, the 1/2 on it, suddenly Sank Azel is giving a minion +4 and rush. And it's also getting 2 additional durability, so Sank Azel could be a real menace. Now, I've mentioned this, sunscreen gives him some nice stats. You could also put Sank Azel on the board and use Scrapbooking Student to get a copy of your Sank Azels. Why do you want the Sank Azels? Well, why are minions balanced, so to speak, in Hearthstone? I know that's kind of a broad, overarching theme. One of the things that balances minions is they're destructible. And anytime we have minions in Hearthstone that are not destructible, they normally break the game. Jailer, for example. Sank Azel, if he ever hides in the location form, and he's going to be mainly at the end of your turn in location form, you can't interact with that so easily. There are some cards, obviously, for example, Reno can just you away. There's also Twisting Nether, which is the other one on here, that can destroy locations. Other than that, there's not a lot of location destruction in the game right now. So, putting Sankazel on the board and hiding it in the Sankazel location kind of gives you this minion that can't ever be removed. It's not quite true, but it's really hard to remove it. The only, like, downside to this is that Sankazel could never go face, and it's kind of how it's balanced. However, if you get a minion to stick on the board coming back round to your turn, and you'll keep buffing this Sankazel, the Sankazel plus 3 attack becomes, you know, plus 4, plus 5, plus 6, and you can kind of get onto a minion that already can attack for that turn, and you can kind of treat it like a big buff for a minion, kind of like a charging minion, so I think this is going to be really, really frightening. Other things about this to note, Sankazel's a rush minion, so you can actually tutor it with Pipsy. You can also resummon it with Tear, because it's a 3 attack minion. And imagine the situation where, you know, you get rid of Sankazel, and you're like, holy shit, I've killed it by, like, some miracle. Like, my opponent was forced to attack into my minion and, you know, trade it out, for example. And they just play Tear, and Sankazel comes back. That's going to be really upsetting for you. Especially when you could play Tear, Sankazel comes back, Sankazel attacks, you get the location, Sankazel then gives Tear plus 3 attack and rush, the Tear attacks, Sankazel attacks maybe another minion, goes back into location form. Like, this card could be truly, truly disgusting, so kind of watch this space on this legendary. And by the way, just a reminder again, Mage could put this into their deck if they take the Paladin Tourist card, and it is an elemental, so this could go into Elemental Mage. And we've seen that Elemental Mage, or just Elemental decks in general, have more support. They would love to run Sankazel in that deck, so don't be surprised to see that the Mage Tourist card might just go into that deck solely to put Sankazel into it. It might be that good enough a card to do it, and you just accept you have this dead card in your 30-card deck. Maybe. Alright, now we go to the card that we kind of, we revealed it a little bit earlier on. 6 mana, Holy Spell, Power Spike. Deal 4 damage, give a random friendly minion, +4/+4. It's kind of like a combination of Blessing of Kings and Eviscerate on the combo form, which is like a 6 mana combo-ish. Whenever you bundle cards together, they typically get better than the individual added mana cost. I will say though, I think this card is really bad for like standard. Blessing of the Kings wouldn't see play in standard anyway, Eviscerate rarely sees play in standard. Normally it's like this sort of like machine gunny or a big combo deck on the rogue to finish someone off at the end. So, although it is like, the mana cost of these two cards combined, and the combo combined with Eviscerate, I still don't think it's good enough. What I will say, and I think this is kind of how the power level is associated with the card, there are a few holy synergies like Holy Cowboy, make your next Holy Spell cost 2 less, that makes Power Spike suddenly a 4 mana spell, and that 4 mana I think is actually pretty solid. Similarly, if you played Holy Spike with Holy Glow Sticks, it's a 7 mana deal 8 damage, and Paladins never really had this before, and I did mention on the mini set reveals when Holy Glow Sticks came out, we're approaching a point where this, like, spell damage Paladin deck could become a thing, and it was like, watch this space, because there's a lot of cards in Paladin right now that go to the face. It's approaching Mage levels, and we've got another one in the form of Power Spike. I just don't think there's any way to, like, truly abuse it, though, currently. But we'll see. Well, who knows what Rogue is going to give us from this set. I will also say again, Mage could use these cards. I don't think it's inconceivable that Rainbow Mage runs the Tourist again to take advantage of some of the cards we're about to see from Paladin. And if they do this, I don't think they're necessarily going to use it for Power Spike, but they could get access to Holy Spells, which is another spell school that Mage couldn't get to normally, so you could put a Holy Spell in your deck. Again, Power Spike as well would be affected by Sif, but it's too expensive, I think, to run into your Sif deck. Unlike this card, Life-Saving Aura, another Holy Spell, it's 1 mana. At the end of your turn, get a 1-cost sunscreen that gives +1/+2, lasts 3 turns. Alright, we've seen like the combo now for these sunscreens. There's the Volleymore that gives you sunscreens, there's a Sunsapper Lunessa that gives you the effect twice, and then obviously probably at the end of all of this, you play Lady Liadrin and get all of these sunscreens back again that you can then put onto other cards. It's really, really slow. You kind of need a big payoff for this. We'll see in a moment if there is a big payoff for this. Just as a note as well, you could shoot to this because it's an aura with Trinket Artist, which would be very nice. And I've also mentioned, I think this card might see play in a tempo spell mage deck. It's actually really efficient with Rayla, the mage tourist. You play your auras at some point in the game, you save these sunscreens for later, and then Rayla just machine guns them off. I think we mentioned it, in fact, in the reverse way before, but it's a really good idea. Also, in terms of cheat spells, we have Divine Brew. This is the Drinkies for Paladin. 1 mana Holy Spell. Give a character Divine Shield. If it had one, give it +1 attack this turn. Note this turn. And it's 3 uses of it. I think in a vacuum, this card is really, really shit. No offense. It's basically Hand of Protection, but you can use it 3 times. And Hand of Protection wasn't particularly good when it was printed. Giving a minion Divine Shield seems to be like one of those things. It's like a half mana type deal. So it's kind of hard to balance it on a integer mana cost. Though there are some nice situations of using this card. For example, you could put it on Sank Azel. I mentioned that probably the best way to get rid of Sank Azel is it trading into your opponent's minions and slowly losing health, which loses durability on the location and eventually won't be able to turn it into its other form because it'll be dead. If you're playing your Sank Azels and you're giving it Divine Brew, it swings, it goes into a location, you push the button, he comes back, you give it another Divine Brew, he gets Divine Shield again, you protect him, he goes back into the location form. All in all, he uses 1 durability, he loses 1 health, and has sort of traded 9 stats, because obviously you've got the 3 attack from the location as well. That's pretty nice. Maybe makes it worth running it. Similar with Tigress Plushie, that comes out with Divine Shield already. You get the +1 attack effect on that then, which is 1 mana gain, 1 attack for this turn. Is that good enough? No, but it's just, there are Divine Shield minions in the game, if you would like those. I think the more likely place for this to see play is some sort of benefit for casting lots of spells. For example, lots of holy spells. Starlight Groove could be reset with this fairly easily. Flickering Lightbot as well could get discounted pretty easily with the Divine Brew. Neither of these cards see any play though, and I don't think just the Divine Brew will be good enough for these. However, is there any other synergies? Oh, I forgot this, by the way. There is this potential turn 1 turn. I say potential turn 1. Potential 2 second turn, sorry. If you start with the coin and you play a minion, you coin Divine Brew, and then as long as that minion retains the Divine Shield onto the second turn, you could spotlight it a turn 2 5/5 elemental. It's a pipe dream, it won't happen. But I think this is the cheapest way to put Divine Shield on a minion for your spotlight now. I don't think it's good enough still though, but just watch this space in case people start Divine Brewing their board and spotlighting them. Alright, we have another minion. We have Service Ace. 3 mana 3/3. After this minion gains attack, reduce the cost of the highest cost card in your hand by 1. Disgusting. Filthy, disgusting card. Except he is a handsome looking fellow. Obviously, the name of the game here is how do you gain attack. The obvious way to do it is to put sunscreens on him. You just slather him up with sunscreen so that he's well protected. And he starts discounting these expensive spells, or cards even, in your hand. For example, your Renos, your Amethysts, which, by the way, Amethyst can also buff your minions, which means that Amethyst could be a self-fulfilling prophecy that gets another buff off the Service Ace to another card. And you can also do this with Sank Azel, even, because in location form, he can buff attack. And it only has to be attack, so you play your Service Ace, you play your Sank Azel attacks, you give +3 attack to the Service Ace, he discounts the card by 1, and then that also has Rush to swing in as well, as does the Sank Azel. So that's kind of the pipe dream on all of this. Maybe casting a ton of sunscreens is worth it to get a discount on your most expensive spell if you're looking for some sort of combo. I don't fully see the combo there. I'm actually not sure this card will see any play currently, but again, watch this space on the rogue cards. We've not seen them yet, and maybe something disgusting can happen with the rogue cards. One thing I'll mention again is Tear can bring this back. It's a 3 attack minion, so potentially you could get something really, really cheap. For example, even the Tear, if you start discounting Tear, for example, and use Tear to bring back Service Ace, it sort of self-fulfilled itself, and it's a lot of value, but I think it's a lot of hoops to jump through for that benefit. But just as an FYI, as I'm recording this, Reno has been nerfed. It's now 9 mana, so... 9. It's now 10 mana, so you might want to bring it back down to, towards 9 and so on. In which case, this is your combo wombo. And at the very least, if you package it all together, the sunscreen plus the Service Ace... The Service Ace kind of discounts the sunscreen, so to speak, but on another card. So you can kind of treat this as it's kind of like a 3 mana 4/5 hand wavy, kind of, which is probably good enough to see some play in standard. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the sunscreen Service Ace won't enable combos, but it's just going to give you an incremental amount of value, which might just go under the radar, but will actually be really good. Alright, a card I don't think will go under the radar, and this is actually the reason why you would do all these casting spells things, and I think this might be good enough for that. It is a 10 mana paladin spell, Sea Shanty. Summon 3 5/5 pirates. Cost 1 less for each spell you cast on characters this game. Cool! Just as a reminder, Eye of the Storm was 3 5/6s with Taunt, had Overload 3 and was 10 mana, so it was kind of like a 13 mana card. Now you did get 5/6s, so you got 3 more health for the cost, and you got Taunt, which is kind of worth like approaching a mana, 2 mana type deal. That saw a little bit of play in some sort of decks. Sea Shanty could be discounted to 0. Oh boy, this is going to be really fun. Obviously, you're going to want to be using the sunscreens. I just put Life-Saving Aura on here. I think this package is actually good enough to see some play. You start sunscreening everything, you give your other minions these board buffs, and then eventually you'll play a Sea Shanty, maybe around turn 5, that is 15/15 of stats. And people just won't be able to deal with that turn. So, yeah, this is a really strong card. Similar to this Divine Brew, which I said I didn't think was particularly good. However, in combination with Sea Shanty, it's a card that contains 3 cards that all target a character. That's really good. That's -3 on the Sea Shanty. Obviously, you're paying it with the Divine Brew, but you can incrementally pay it on earlier turns. Hand of Adar as well, you know, that's a very solid card. It sees a lot of play in most Paladin decks anyway. It's a draw a card and a hand buff. It would take 1 off the Sea Shanty as well. Now, I kind of alluded to this before. This could be used in Big Spell Mage as well, if you are willing to put Layla into your deck. Now, there's not really any other big spells from the Paladin side of things, so you'd be having to look at the minion package as well of this. But if you put this into Big Spell Mage, even without the effects of discounting it, which you still could do, because again, it's on characters, not just minions, it's characters. So anything that targets the face could also discount it, which Mage is also pretty good at doing, targeting the face. But without all of this, with the other cheating cards that Mage has, maybe they tried to put Sea Shanty into it with Rayla just for that purpose. I'm not sure. I don't think it will be a thing, because Rayla is much better at cheaper spells than, you know, these giant spells. It's kind of like putting a dead card into your deck, really, just to put Sea Shanty into it. But maybe, I did say that you need, like, one other big payoff, and Sea Shanty, I think, would fit that criteria. So maybe you run Rayla into your deck. Maybe try and generate some cheap spells for Rayla to use into your big spell mage. Again, as I said, this tourist mechanic creates some really interesting deck building situations. Now, I've also put this as a wild only thing. Good luck wild with Holy Mackerel into wild. They throw, you know, 5 Holy Mackerels out on turn 5, and the next turn they play a Sea Shanty on turn 6. That's going to be pretty disgusting, ignoring all the previous turns where you probably could have cast multiple spells. Twin spell and stuff is in wild. I don't normally worry about it, but I was like looking at this card and I was like, holy shit, is there a world where Sea Shanty gets played on like turn 0? Well, not turn 0, but turn 1, so to speak. I don't know if they can rattle off that many spells as a Paladin deck, but I'm pretty certain you'll be able to get this out fairly cheap. I wouldn't be surprised if you could get it out by like turn 5-ish. Also, insane card alert. Grillmaster, 4 mana 3/4 minion. Battlecry, draw the lowest card of your deck. Death Rattle, draw the highest cost card. This is so good. I want to remind you that Astral Serpent has seen play in Paladin decks very recently. It's a 4 mana 3/3 draw 2 cards. You don't get those 2 cards until the end of your turn either. Grillmaster, you get 1 more health, and you get one of the cards early. Now, it is the lowest cost card, but sometimes you want the lowest cost card, right? And you can also shoot for it with the Grillmaster. Very versatile card. The highest cost card does come through the Death Rattle. It might not come through the next turn, it might be the turn afterwards. But, you know, there's almost an inevitability about it. I only say almost because there are ways to, you know, silence, bounce. But even if you bounce Grillmaster back, you will still draw another low cost card, so it's all gravy, really. Like, very good card. 4 mana 3/4 draw 2. Oh, and also tutors for the highest and the lowest. And often you want, like, the highest or the lowest cost card in your deck. For example, let's say you want to draw your Sea Shanty so you have it. That's probably going to be the highest card in your deck. Let's say you're playing the Flood Paladin deck. You might want your Sea Giant. We had this before. We had Order in the Court, which allowed you to get the Sea Giants out early. And they nerfed Order in the Court because it was too strong. We now have Grillmaster to fulfill Order in the Court. It costs 1 more mana, but you get a body with it instead, and another card. Imagine playing, you know, your Grillmaster on Even on 5, you get your Righteous Protector, or, you know, one of your other cheap 1-drops. You drop that on the board, the Grillmaster trades into the deck turn, you get the Sea Giant. You start flooding the board with minions, you get a cheap Sea Giant out there. Like, I think some disgusting things could happen via Grillmaster. Really good card. Also, again, as a reminder, Reno is now a 10-mana card, so in your Highlander decks, you might want to put this into that deck, because it will draw out your Reno for you. That's really good to get your Reno. Like, there's the big payoff for being a Highlander deck. Very strong card. Also, you might be in the market of the more hand buffy tokeny decks, in which case you might have Amatus or Miracle Salesman. Like, you know, you're getting 2 good cards for this, is what I'm saying. Also, worth noting again, Mage with Rayla can put this into their deck, and this might be good in the tempo deck. Imagine you're playing your tempo deck, you play Grillmaster, it draws you a Seabreeze Chalice, and not only that, on the Death Rattle, draws you Mantle Shaper. You start machine gunning the spells out with the Seabreeze Chalice, it has 3 drinks in it, and very soon you get a Mantle Shaper that costs, you know, 2 or less. And also you're generating, potentially with the Railer as well, and all of this, tons of little cheap minions. I actually can see this package being some sort of a thing. I don't think, from what I've seen so far, it's going to be like a tier 1 deck. Maybe not even tier 2, but maybe tier 3. The other important thing about this card is it could set up a situation for Rainbow Death Knight to tutor for Sif. Sif is often one of the more expensive cards in that deck. It's not normally the most expensive, but it's up there. With Grillmaster and Rayla in your deck, and again, Rayla's probably in this deck actually going to be functional. You're probably going to have some spells you want to cast with Rayla. You could potentially find your Sif from your deck with your Grillmaster, and find a cheap spell, which is often a spell that you would want to target the face and use with Sif. So it kind of fulfills the combo. Like, this card I think is really, really good. Really, really, really good. So I'd love to see all the decks this goes into. Alright, we've kind of gone from the absurd now. I'm bringing it back down a little bit, but I still think this card is okay. Lifeguard, 4 mana 2/7 minion with Taunt. Battlecry, the next spell you cast has Lifesteal. There's some obvious examples here of what to cast with it. Keeper's Strength would be a pretty nice one. Depends on how big the board is, but if you get this to a 4/9 instead, the attack hits all of the other minions. I think you do get the lifesteal off this. I'm pretty certain, don't quote me on this one. And that might just take you back to 30. It definitely works with Prismatic Beam. If you play your Lifeguard into your Prismatic Beam, hit all your opponent's board, and maybe heal for like 21. I do think it's a bit of a pipe dream, though. I don't think that it's going to be a realistic scenario. Again, though, it might be more realistic in Mage, and Mage doesn't have access to healing normally. They typically have, like, very weak access to gaining armor. So maybe in, you know, one of these Mage decks, might be like a Control or a Combo Mage deck, you might want to put a Lifeguard in there. Obviously, you need the Tourist again, and you use something like Star Power, 15 damage, gain 15 life. That's pretty good, right? Rising Waves, potentially, depending on how big the board is, could be this giant heal. You're on 1 life, you're like shitting yourself. Your opponent's doing Climatic and Necrotic Explosion, and suddenly you play Rising Waves. You deal, I don't even know what damage you're looking at that point, maybe like 40 or 50 damage, and you're back at full health, and very happy. The final thing, this is all the Paladin cards we've seen. There were 2 cards which were accidentally leaked on the reveal of the other cards. This is the Warlock spell Fellfire Bonfire, which is a 4 mana Fell spell. Deal 4 damage to a minion. If it dies, your next Death Rattle minion costs 3 less. And for Warrior, Char, 4 mana Fire spell, deal 7 damage to a minion. Give a minion in your hand stats equal to the excess damage. I don't want to talk about these too much. I'd rather do it with the rest of the set. But it does give you an idea that Warlock seems to like it's going to have some sort of Death Rattle package, and Char might be some sort of Warrior hand buff package. Very interesting. Anyway, that'll do it for the reveals for today. I think tomorrow is Demon Hunter. I don't know if there's 2 sets coming out tomorrow, but I'll probably try and do 2 together. And hopefully the Hearthstone team keeps putting together like the Tourist and the Decades of Tourist for to make my life easier. And again, just watch out for the rogue cards, because the Paladin cards, obviously we can't fully elucidate them until we see the rogue card, and similarly for the Mage cards, you can't fully elucidate them until we see the Druid Taurus. So, alright, that's your lot for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, why not leave a like, comment, subscribe? Everything helps me out, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!